At 6 o'clock in the morning, the humidity in Savannah was already rising, clinging to the Spanish moss that draped over the ancient oaks lining my driveway. But the stillness of the dawn was violently shattered when my front door began to shake. The heavy mahogany, wood that had stood firm through hurricanes and a century of history, groaned under the assault. My daughter-in-law, Serena, was screaming my name from the porch, her voice hysterical and pitched so high it frightened the cardinals from the feeders. She sounded like a woman possessed, pounding her fists against the wood as if the house belonged to her by divine right. She did not know that I had changed every single lock the night before. Minutes later, the screaming stopped, replaced by a heavier, more ominous sound. My son Julian had arrived with a sledgehammer. "I am going to get in, one way or another," he yelled, his voice cracking with a desperation I had never heard before. It was the sound of a man watching his future evaporate. Through the thick wood and the beveled glass of the transom, I could see his shadow raising the heavy tool. But just as he tensed his muscles to strike a blow that would have splintered the historic frame, a deep, resonant voice behind me simply said, "Hold on, Eleanor. I will take care of this." I stood on the other side of the foyer, barefoot on the cold, checkerboard marble tiles that my late husband Arthur had laid with his own hands 40 years ago. My heart was pounding so hard against my ribs that I could feel the pulse throbbing in my temples, a rhythmic drumbeat of adrenaline and sorrow. My hands, usually steady from years of gardening and needlepoint, were trembling violently. They were not trembling from fear, however. They were trembling from rage. It was a rage that had been contained, pressurized, and silently fermented for 4 agonizing months into something cold, calculated, and harder than diamond. I looked at the grandfather clock standing sentinel in the hallway, the one Arthur had wound every Sunday night until the day he died. It was 6 minutes past 6. Mr. Silas Thorne, the most feared estate attorney in Georgia, would step into the light in exactly 14 minutes. I just had to hold out. I just had to keep breathing. "Mom!" The voice belonged to Julian now. "My son. My only child. I know you are in there. Open up right now." "You are acting like a child!" I heard a metallic thud against the doorframe, a warning shot, and then his voice dropped to a growl I didn't recognize. "I am getting in anyway, with a key or with a hammer." I peered through the brass peephole. The distortion of the lens turned my son into a monster. Julian was holding a sledgehammer, one of those heavy ones used for breaking concrete. His eyes were bloodshot, wild, lacking any of the warmth I had nurtured for 40 years. Serena stood next to him, her arms crossed over her chest, a twisted smile of anticipated victory playing on her lips. It was the smile of a predator who believes the prey is cornered. My legs felt weak, threatening to buckle beneath the weight of the betrayal. Was this how everything was going to end? My son, the baby I had nursed through colic, the boy I had comforted when he scraped his knees on this very porch, the young man I had helped pay for college, and his first failed business. Was he really going to knock down my door to destroy me? Then the deep voice resonated behind me again. I turned my head slowly. Mr. Silas Thorne was standing in the hallway, emerging from the shadows of the library like an avenging angel in a 3-piece charcoal suit. He held a leather briefcase in his hand, and his posture was as upright as a soldier's. He had arrived early, slipping in through the garden entrance, just as we had planned. "How did you get in without them hearing?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Through the azalea garden, Mrs. Vance, just as you instructed last night." He looked at me with calm gray eyes that conveyed absolute authority. "Open the door for them, Eleanor. It is time for them to see what they have truly lost." My hand went to the deadbolt. The metal felt cold and final. I slid it open slowly. I turned the heavy brass knob. The door swung inward. And the moment Julian and Serena saw Silas Thorne standing there, his imposing presence filling the foyer with the weight of the law, the sledgehammer fell from Julian's hands to the porch floor with a dull, defeated thud. They both turned pale, literally draining of color, as if they had seen a ghost. Because they knew exactly who that man was. They knew Silas Thorne had never lost a case in Savannah, and they knew, in that split second, that their plan had just crumbled into dust. But before I tell you how I came to change the locks on my own house to protect myself from the fruit of my own womb, I need you to understand something fundamental. I was not always this woman. The Eleanor Vance, who opened that door with steady hands and dry eyes, didn't exist 4 months ago. 4 months ago, I was someone else. I was a fool. I was a naive widow. I was a mother who believed that love was a currency that could never be devalued. If you want to know how a 72-year-old woman went from being the perfect victim to slamming the door in her own family's face, you need to listen closely, because what comes next will change the way you see a mother's love forever. Mr. Thorne did not smile. He didn't need to. His mere presence was enough to shift the atmospheric pressure in the doorway. He took a step forward, positioning himself right beside me, a barrier between my frailty and their aggression. He spoke with that voice that had terrified half the con artists in the state. "Good morning, Julian." "Serena." He paused deliberately, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. "I regret to inform you that you no longer have the legal authority to enter this property without the express, written consent of the owner." Serena was the first to react. Her face went from the pallor of shock to an intense, blotchy red in a matter of seconds. "Who the hell do you think you are? We live here. This is our home. We have rights." The lawyer opened his briefcase with exasperating calm. The click of the latches sounded like gunshots in the quiet morning air. He took out a thick manila folder and extracted several documents stamped with the official seal of the county. The sound of the crisp paper was the only thing that could be heard besides my son's ragged breathing. "I am Silas Thorne, attorney at law, representing Mrs. Eleanor Vance. And these documents mean that, as of 11:45 last night, March 15th, this property located at 12 Oaks Lane was transferred to an irrevocable trust." Julian finally found his voice. It sounded broken, desperate, like a child who has dropped his ice cream in the sand. "Mom, what did you do?" I looked at him. I really looked at him. And in that moment, I didn't see the successful architect he claimed to be. I saw the scared child who used to hide behind my skirts when his father scolded him. But layered over that child, I also saw the man who, 2 weeks ago, had told his wife that I had lived long enough. "What I should have done 4 months ago, Julian," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I protected myself." Serena let out a hysterical, disbelief-filled laugh. "Protect yourself? From us? We take care of you. We give you company. Without us, you would be alone, dying in this huge, empty mausoleum of a house?" Mr. Thorne interrupted her without raising his voice, cutting through her hysteria like a knife. "Mrs. Serena, I suggest you measure your words very carefully. Everything you say at this moment can and will be used against you in civil court if Mrs. Vance decides to proceed with the fraud charges." "Fraud?" Julian stepped forward, his hands shaking. "But I invested in this house. I paid for the roof repair. I put money toward the new HVAC system. That house is as much mine as it is hers." There it was. The lie they had been feeding me and themselves for 4 months. The lie they had repeated so many times that I had almost started to believe my own memory was failing. The lawyer smiled for the first time. It was a small, almost imperceptible curling of his lip, but it was there. "Oh, really? That is interesting. Because according to the bank records Mrs. Vance provided me, the roof was repaired last August with $87,000 that she withdrew from her personal savings account. The HVAC system was installed in October, also paid for by her check, for an amount of $52,000. Would you like me to continue listing the expenses you claim to have paid?" Julian opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. He looked like a fish pulled from the river, gasping for air that wasn't there. Serena, realizing that aggression wasn't working, changed tactics instantly. She put her hands to her chest, and tears began to stream down her cheeks. These were the weaponized tears she had perfected over these 4 months. "Eleanor, I don't understand. We are family. How can you do this to us after everything we have shared? After I nursed you when you had the flu?" Something broke inside me then, but it wasn't my heart. It was the last chain of guilt that tied me to this charade. Family? My voice came out stronger, projecting from my diaphragm the way I had learned in choir decades ago. You talk to me about family, Serena? The same family that sold my late husband's antique first edition books for pennies? The same family that conned me out of $150,000 by lying about a terminal illness to pay for a tummy tuck and a nose job? Her face crumpled. The tears kept falling, but now they were tears of panic, not performance. I was sick, the doctor said. The doctors at the Silver Creek Cosmetic Surgery Center, right? The lawyer pulled out another document, holding it up so the morning sun illuminated the logo. I have the receipt right here. Abdominoplasty and rhinoplasty, totaling $145,000, paid on January 18th, 3 days after you received the emergency funds from Mrs. Vance. Julian turned to his wife with an expression I had never seen on him. It was a mixture of confusion, anger, and dawn-breaking horror. Is that true? Serena backed up a step, her heels clicking on the porch. You knew that, Julian. You said I deserved it. Don't make me look bad in front of your mother. I knew? My son's voice went up 3 octaves. I knew you were getting a touch-up, not that you stole $150,000 from my mother for a full overhaul. There was the crack, the first fissure in their perfect alliance. The lawyer seized the moment. You have 48 hours to completely vacate this property. You may take your personal clothing, personal toiletries, and electronic items that you can prove are yours. Nothing else. Any item belonging to the estate of Eleanor Vance that is removed without authorization will be considered theft, and legal action will be taken immediately. You can't kick us out, Serena screamed, losing her composure entirely. We have kids, Mia and Leo. Where are we going to live? For the first time in the conversation, the lawyer seemed genuinely annoyed. Perhaps you should have thought of that before you planned to put those children's grandmother in a state-funded nursing home facility so you could sell her house and buy a penthouse in Manhattan. The silence that followed was so dense it felt like the air had turned to solid lead. Julian looked at me. His eyes were glazed over, vacant with shock. How did you know that? I reached into the pocket of my silk robe and pulled out a small digital recorder, the one my friend Beatrice had taught me how to use. I placed it in the palm of my hand and pressed the play button. Serena's voice came out clear, sharp, unmistakable, cutting through the morning birdsong. It is almost done, babe. In a few more months, we will convince her to sign the house over to you. She is old, she is getting senile, she needs us. Then we can put her in that facility on the outskirts of town, the cheap one, and sell this property. It is easily worth $4 million. We will have enough for the apartment in Manhattan we want. And then Julian's voice followed. You are right. Mom has lived long enough in this palace. We deserve this house. It is our turn. I stopped the recording. Julian fell to his knees on the front step. Literally, his legs wouldn't hold him anymore. He slumped against the doorframe, burying his face in his hands. Mom, I didn't mean. Yes, you did, I said with a calm that surprised even me. You said it, you thought it, and you were going to do it. Serena regained her composure with impressive speed. She pointed a manicured finger at Julian. This was his idea. I just followed his plan. He convinced me of everything. He said you were a burden. And right there, before my eyes, I watched them destroy each other. Julian jumped up and confronted her. What? You were the one who said my mother was a useless old woman? You were the one who wanted the luxury apartment. The lawyer closed his briefcase with a dry snap. Folks, your marital problems are none of my business. What is my business is to inform you that you have until Wednesday, March 17th at 6 o'clock in the evening to leave this property. If you do not do so voluntarily, we will proceed with legal eviction and restraining orders. Have a good day. He turned and walked back into the house, his shoes clicking on the marble. I followed him, and before closing the door, I looked at Julian one last time. My son, my only son, was crying silently on the step of the house where I raised him, and I felt nothing. Well, no, that is a lie. I felt relief. I closed the door, and slid the heavy brass bolt home. Mr. Thorne looked at me from the hallway. "Are you all right, Eleanor?" I nodded slowly. Then I walked into the living room and sat down on the velvet sofa, the one where Arthur used to read me poetry on Sunday afternoons. And for the first time in 4 months, I took a deep breath that reached the bottom of my lungs. But you must be wondering, how did it all get to this point? How does a mother come to corner her own son, planning his banishment with the precision of a general? To understand that, I have to take you back 4 months, to the day I opened the door of my house and let in not only my son and his family, but my own destruction. It was a Tuesday in November. I remember it because the rain was lashing against the windows, a prelude to the storm that was about to enter my life. It had just turned 11 in the morning when my phone rang. "Mom." Julian's voice sounded strange, subdued, stripped of its usual confidence. "Son, what happened? Are you okay? I need to talk to you. Can I come over? It is urgent." My heart skipped a beat. When a son says something is urgent, a mother imagines the worst. Car accidents, cancer diagnoses, death. "Of course, my love. Come whenever you want. Do you want me to make some soup? It is cold outside." "No, Mom. I just need to talk to you." He hung up before I could say anything else. He arrived at 2 in the afternoon. He wasn't alone. Serena was with him, and behind them, Mia and Leo were carrying large backpacks. Backpacks that looked full to bursting. "Hello, Eleanor," Serena said with that smile that I then believed was genuine. "Sorry for coming without calling first." "No, don't worry. Come in. Do you want tea? Coffee?" The children ran off toward the sunroom. Mia was 14 and Leo was 10. Good kids, always polite, though lately I saw them less and less, as Julian claimed they were too busy with extracurriculars. Julian sat on the sofa and ran his hands over his face, that gesture he had made since he was a child when he was nervous or hiding something. "Mom, we lost the condo." The words dropped like stones into a well. "What do you mean you lost it?" Serena sat next to him and took his hand. At that moment, I thought, how good that they have each other in difficult times, how stupid I was. "We had problems with the bank," Julian explained, without looking me in the eye. "We couldn't pay the mortgage for 4 months and, well, they foreclosed. They gave us 2 weeks to move out." I put my hand to my chest. My son, my Julian, homeless. "But why didn't you tell me sooner? I could have helped. I have savings." "We didn't want to worry you, Eleanor," Serena interjected sweetly. "You have already done so much for us. We didn't want to be a burden." "You are never a burden. You are my family." Julian finally looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed. "Mom, I need to ask you a huge favor, the biggest one I have ever asked you in my life." "Anything, son. Whatever you need. Can we stay here just temporarily while we find another place? Maybe 2 or 3 months maximum? Just until I get the new contract signed?" My house had 6 bedrooms. Since Arthur died 5 years ago, I had lived alone in this huge space that suddenly felt too big, too silent. The idea of having my family near, of hearing children's laughter, of cooking for more than one person, was intoxicating. "Of course, you can stay as long as you need. This is your home." Serena jumped up and hugged me. She smelled of expensive perfume, Chanel, too expensive for someone who had just lost their home. "Thank you, Eleanor. You don't know how much this means to us." That same afternoon, they started bringing their things, boxes, many boxes, more than could fit in an SUV. Julian had rented a small moving truck. "Is all this necessary?" I asked, seeing the quantity of items. "Well, we don't know how long we will be staying, Mom. We prefer to have everything handy." It made sense, or at least I thought so. The first week was nice. I cooked for everyone. The children did their homework at the dining room table. Julian left early to look for work. Serena stayed home. She said it was to watch the children and help me around the house. But there were small things, subtle erosions of my boundaries that at the time I ignored. Serena moved the living room furniture to make more space. Arthur's leather armchair, the one where he spent hours reading, ended up shoved in the garage. "It is just too worn out, Eleanor," she said. "It looks ugly there. It ruins the feng shui." She replaced the bath towels with new ones she bought. Mine, hand-embroidered by my mother, she stored in a box. These are more modern. You have to update, Eleanor. She started cooking too, but not food that I liked. Different food with spices I had never used, kale smoothies that tasted like dirt. And when I tried to cook something traditional, like my Sunday roast, she would sigh. "Oh, Eleanor, so much red meat isn't good for your heart at your age." One day, 2 weeks after they arrived, I went down for breakfast and found that the dining room curtains had disappeared. "Where are the curtains?" I asked. Serena was making a green smoothie in the blender. She didn't even turn around. I took them down. They blocked the natural light. "Your house was very dark, Eleanor. It needed brightness." I had sewn those curtains myself. It took me 3 weeks to finish them. They had an embroidered bird design that my mother taught me to do, but I liked those curtains. They were very old, Eleanor. It was time for a change. Julian came in at that moment and kissed Serena on the cheek. "Good morning, Mom." "Son, did you see that Serena took down the dining room curtains?" "Oh yeah, they look better like this, don't they? More illuminated." "But I made them. It took me a long time." Julian poured himself coffee with a distracted smile. "Mom, don't be so sentimental. They are just curtains. Serena has good taste. You should trust her more." I stayed silent, standing in the kitchen of my own house, feeling like I was the one who was out of place. "You are right," I finally said. "Just curtains." Serena smiled at me. That smile that I still believed was kind. "That is what I like, Eleanor. Be flexible. Change is good." That night, lying in bed, I looked at the ceiling and thought of Arthur. How he always used to say, "Eleanor, you are too kind. Someday someone is going to take advantage of that." But this was different, right? It was my family. The real change began in the 3rd week. Serena walked into my bedroom without knocking. I was folding laundry when I saw her standing in the doorway with that expression I was starting to know all too well. Determination disguised as concern. "Eleanor, we need to talk about this room." "My room? What is wrong with it?" She walked in and looked around, touching things: the antique mahogany dresser, the mirror with the gold frame, the photograph of my wedding on the wall. It is too full, too cluttered. It is not healthy for you to have so much mess." I looked around. My room wasn't messy. Everything was in its place. Every object had a history. "It is not messy, Serena. It is lived in." "Exactly. That is the problem." She sat down on my bed as if it were hers. "You live in the past, surrounded by things from a husband who is no longer here. It is not healthy. You need to let go. Move on." Her words hurt like a slap. Arthur was my husband for 42 years. I am not going to let go of his memories. I am not asking you to forget him, Eleanor, just to put the things away, to make space for the present. The next day, while I was out at church, Serena rearranged the living room. When I returned, the photographs of Arthur that were on the mantelpiece had disappeared. In their place were scented candles and an artificial succulent plant. "Where are Arthur's photos?" "I put them away in a box in your closet, Eleanor. That way, they are more protected from the sunlight." "I don't want them protected. I want to see them." Serena sighed with that exaggerated patience used with small children or the senile. "Eleanor, you can't turn your house into a shrine. Your husband is resting in peace. You need to live." I went to my closet. I found the box, but not all the photos were there. My favorite was missing. Arthur and I in Charleston on our honeymoon. He was carrying me in his arms. "Serena, a photo is missing." "Which one?" "The Charleston one. The one with the silver frame." "Oh, that one. It fell and the glass broke. I threw it away." "You threw it away?" "The frame was tarnished anyway, Eleanor. It was no longer any good." I felt something shatter inside my chest. Not the frame, me. That night, Julian came home late. I waited up for him. "Son, I need to talk to you." "Mom, I am tired. Can it be tomorrow?" "No, it has to be now." He slumped onto the sofa with an annoyed sigh. "All right, what is wrong?" "Serena is throwing away your father's things. She changed the whole house, and I feel like a stranger in my own home." Julian didn't even look me in the eye. He kept scrolling on his cell phone. Mom, Serena is just trying to help. This house was very neglected, very old-fashioned. It is my house, Julian, and I liked it the way it was. Well, maybe you needed someone to show you that there are other ways to live. He finally looked up. Do you know what your problem is, Mom? You cling too much to the past. Dad died 5 years ago. It is time for you to move on. His words pierced me like knives. Does moving on mean forgetting your father? It means stopping living in a museum. He stood up. Serena is trying to modernize things. You should be grateful that someone cares about you. I stayed seated in the darkness of the living room with Serena's scented candles perfuming the air with a smell of vanilla that wasn't my home. And for the first time since they moved in, I cried. But the worst was yet to come. The worst wasn't just the stealing of objects, it was the stealing of something much more valuable, my compassion. It was a Thursday afternoon, late January. I remember the exact date because the azaleas were just starting to bud. Serena came into the kitchen, looking distraught. She had been going to doctor's appointments all week, or so she said. Eleanor, I have terrible news. She sat down at the table, burying her face in her hands. What is it, honey? Is it the children? No, it is me. She looked up, her eyes swimming in tears. The doctors found a growth. They think it might be malignant. My blood ran cold. Despite everything, despite the curtains and the photos, I didn't wish harm on anyone. Oh my God! Serena, what can we do? There is a treatment, a specialized surgery, but our insurance, since Julian lost his job, we have no coverage for this specific procedure. It is considered elective by the insurance company, but the doctor says it is necessary to save my life. How much? I asked immediately. $150,000. She whispered the number like a prayer. It was a fortune. It was a significant chunk of my retirement savings. But this was the mother of my grandchildren. We will pay it, I said without hesitation. Really? Eleanor, you would do that? Of course. We will go to the bank tomorrow. I withdrew the money. I handed her the cashier's check. She hugged me, crying tears of gratitude. I felt like I was doing the right thing. I felt like the matriarch taking care of her brood. For the next 2 weeks, Serena was recovering at a clinic in another state. Julian told me she was weak, that she couldn't have visitors. I prayed for her every night. And then came the day that changed everything. I was at the local farmer's market, buying peaches. I ran into Beatrice, an old friend whose daughter worked as a nurse. Eleanor, I haven't seen you in ages. How are you? I am managing, Beatrice. Worried about Serena, though. Serena? Why? Her surgery. The cancer treatment. Beatrice looked confused. Cancer? Eleanor, my daughter works at the Silver Creek Cosmetic Surgery Center. She saw Serena there last week. I froze. Maybe you are mistaken. No, I am not. My daughter said Serena was bragging about her new nose and her tummy tuck. She said her mother-in-law paid for the whole new U package. The basket of peaches fell from my hand. They rolled across the pavement, bruised and dirty, just like my heart. I drove home in a daze. I walked into the house. Serena was back from her treatment. She was in the living room, looking at herself in a hand mirror. Her nose was taped. She was wearing a compression garment around her waist. Serena, I said, my voice trembling. She looked up, startled. Oh, Eleanor, you are back early. I ran into Beatrice at the market. Her daughter works at Silver Creek. Serena went pale. Then, slowly, she lowered the mirror. She told me about the nose job. She told me about the tummy tuck. Serena stood up. Eleanor, let me explain. Explain what? That you lied to me? That you told me you had cancer, so I would pay for your vanity? I didn't say cancer. I said a growth. And I needed this for my self-esteem. You don't understand the pressure, Eleanor. Just then, Julian walked in. What is going on? Your wife stole $150,000 from me, I screamed. Julian didn't look surprised. He looked annoyed. Mom, keep your voice down. The neighbors will hear. You knew? I looked at him. You knew she wasn't sick? Mom, Serena has been depressed about her looks for years. She needed this pick-me-up. And honestly, what were you going to do with that money? Let it rot in the bank? At least now it brought someone happiness. I looked at them, my son and his wife, standing there, justifying theft because they thought I was too old to need my own money. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered the house like a ghost. I went down to the kitchen for water at 2 a.m. The patio door was open. I heard voices. It is almost done, babe. Serena's voice. We just need to push her a little more. By May, she will be so broken down, she will sign anything. And then Julian. You are right. Mom has lived long enough. We deserve this house. I hid in the shadows and listened. They planned to declare me incompetent. They planned to put me in a state facility. They planned to sell my home, Arthur's home, and move to New York. I went back to my room. I didn't cry. I packed a bag with my deeds, my bank statements, and I waited for the sun to rise. The next morning, I called Silas Thorne. I met him in his office. I told him everything. I played him the recordings I started making after the market incident. He looked at me over his glasses. Eleanor, this is war. Are you ready? I am ready, Silas. We spent the next month planning. I transferred the assets. I set up the trust. I endured their insults, their condescension, their theft. With a smile on my face, I let them think they were winning. And then came the night of the locks. I waited until they were asleep. I called the locksmith. I had arranged days in advance. He worked silently. By 3 a.m, my house was a fortress again. Which brings us back to the present, to the relief washing over me as the moving truck drove away, taking my son and his greed with it. That night, I sat in the living room. The walls were still gray, the curtains were still gone, but the air was different. It was clean. I looked at the empty space where Arthur's chair used to be. I am sorry it took me so long, Arthur, I whispered. But I fixed it. I know you did, the silence seemed to answer. 3 months later, the house is mine again. I painted the walls a soft yellow. I bought new velvet curtains. I found Arthur's chair in the garage and had it restored. I received a letter from my granddaughter, Mia, last week. She wrote that her parents are getting divorced. Serena left Julian when the money ran out. Julian is living in a small apartment, working double shifts. Mia asked if she could visit. I wrote back immediately, yes. Because family isn't about blood or obligation or tolerating abuse. Family is about respect. It is about love that builds you up, not tears you down. I lost my son, yes, but I found myself. I found Eleanor Vance again. And as I sit here on my porch, drinking my tea and watching the azaleas bloom, I know one thing for certain. I will never lock myself out of my own life again.